I'm going to tell you something that happened to me 4 months ago, and I want to be upfront about one thing before I start. I'm not the kind of person this is supposed to happen to. I don't believe in anything. I didn't grow up religious. I don't watch horror movies. I don't even like Halloween. I'm a 29-year-old guy who was working the overnight cash booth at a parking garage in Dayton, Ohio, because I needed to make rent after my divorce, and it was the only job that didn't require me to talk to more than 6 people in an 8-hour shift. That's who I am. That's who was sitting in that booth when the logs stopped making sense. The garage is called Cornerstone Parking Systems. It's attached to a mixed-use building downtown. Offices on the upper floors, a couple of medical clinics, a staffing agency, a chiropractor. And the garage itself is 6 levels. Ground level is street access. Levels 2 through 5 are standard parking. Level 6 is the roof. Open air, rarely used. There's a single entry lane with a ticket dispenser and a single exit lane with my booth. The whole thing was built in the early 80s, and it looks like it. Poured concrete, yellow painted curbs, fluorescent tubes that hum at a frequency you can feel in your back teeth. The booth smells like old receipt paper and the ghost of every cigarette the previous cashier smoked in there for 11 years before he retired. My shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. Most nights, it was nothing. The last wave of cars would leave by 8 or 9. People working late, cleaning crews, the occasional person who forgot where they parked. By 10, when I clocked in, there were usually somewhere between 12 and 20 vehicles still in the structure. My job was to sit in the booth, process any exits, monitor the 4 security camera feeds on the little split-screen monitor bolted to the wall, and at the end of my shift, run the nightly reconciliation. That meant printing the ticket log, comparing it to the cash drawer, counting the remaining vehicles on camera, and making sure the numbers agreed. If they didn't, I had to note the discrepancy, fill out an exception form, and leave it for the morning manager, Dale. Dale was the kind of guy who treated a $2 variance in the cash drawer like a federal crime. I'd been written up once for not catching a discrepancy between the log and the vehicle count. It turned out to be a motorcycle that had been parked behind a column where the camera couldn't see it. Dale made me sign a written warning. So I took the reconciliation seriously, not because I cared about parking garage integrity, because I needed the job. The night it happened was a Wednesday in December. Cold, dry, no snow yet, but you could feel it coming. I'd gotten to the booth at 10, set my thermos of coffee on the little shelf next to the monitor, and started my shift the way I always did, checking the log printer to make sure it had paper, confirming the cameras were recording, and pulling up the current vehicle count on the system terminal. The terminal was ancient. Green text on a black screen. It ran some DOS-based program that I'm pretty sure hadn't been updated since Clinton was in office. But it worked. It always worked. That night, the system showed 17 vehicles currently in the garage. I glanced at the 4 camera feeds. Level 2 showed 6 cars. Level 3 showed 4. Level 4 showed 3. Level 5 showed 2. The roof level feed was dark and empty as usual. Ground level showed my booth and the lanes. That's 15, I recounted, still 15 too short. This wasn't unusual enough to worry me. Cars parked behind columns, in blind spots or in corners the cameras didn't cover well. It happened. The cameras were old, the angles were limited. And at night, The lighting on the upper levels was bad enough that dark-colored cars sometimes blended into the shadows. I made a note. Visual count 15, its system count 17, likely blind spot, and settled in. Nothing happened for the next 2 hours. One car left at 11:15, a woman in scrubs. She paid, I lifted the gate. She drove off. The system updated to 16. I scanned the cameras. Now I could count 14. Still too short of the system number. Fine. Blind spots. Around 1 in the morning, I started the preliminary part of my reconciliation. I printed the day's full ticket log. This was a long ribbon of thermal paper that came out of a printer mounted under the counter. Every ticket issued that day, every entry timestamp, every exit timestamp, every payment. I started going through it line by line, matching entries to exits. Most of them paired up cleanly. Car enters at 7:02 a.m., exits at 5:48 p.m., paid $4. Car enters at 8:15 a.m., exits at 9:30 a.m., paid $2. Normal. Then I found the first one that didn't match. Entry timestamp, 11:47 p.m. No exit recorded. Ticket number 4401, assigned floor, B3. I stared at it for a second. Not because of the missing exit, cars that entered late and stayed overnight were common. What caught me was the floor code. B3, I'd worked in that garage for 5 months. I knew the floor codes. Ground level was G. Levels 2 through 5 were L2, L3, L4, L5. The roof was R. There was no B anything. B typically means basement. This garage didn't have a basement. It was built on a concrete slab at street level. There was nothing below ground. I figured it was a system error. The ticket dispenser assigns a floor code based on which sensor the car passes on the way up the ramps. If a sensor malfunctioned or misread, it could spit out a garbage code. I'd seen L7 once, which also didn't exist. Dale told me to just note it and move on, so I noted it. Then I kept reading. Ticket 4402. Entry timestamp, 11:47 p.m. No exit. Assigned floor, B3. Same time, same floor, different ticket number. I pulled the ribbon closer to the booth light. The print was clean. No smearing, no thermal distortion. 2 distinct tickets, issued one right after the other, both at 11:47 p.m., both assigned to B3. I kept going. Ticket 4403. Entry timestamp, 11:48 p.m. No exit. Assigned floor, B3. 3 cars. All entering within a minute of each other, all assigned to a floor that didn't exist. Here's the thing that made my stomach do something it shouldn't have. 11:47 p.m. was 43 minutes ago. I had been sitting in this booth at 11:47. The entry lane was directly in front of me. The ticket dispenser was 15 feet from my window. I would have heard it. I would have seen headlights. The gate would have lifted 3 times, and the mechanical sound of that gate was loud enough to hear through the booth's glass, even with the space heater running. Nothing had come through that lane since the woman in scrubs at 11:15. I put the log ribbon down and looked at the entry camera feed. The gate was down. The lane was empty. I rewound the footage. The system let me scroll back up to 2 hours on each camera. I went to 11:45 p.m. and watched. 11:46, 11:47, 11:48, 11:49. Nothing. The lane sat there, empty, the ticket dispenser's little green light glowing in the dark. No car approached. No ticket was pulled. No gate lifted. but the system had issued 3 tickets. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't scared at this point. I was annoyed. Because I knew exactly what this meant for my reconciliation. 3 phantom entries meant the vehicle count would be off by 3, which meant an exception form, which meant Dale asking me questions at 6 in the morning that I wouldn't be able to answer, which meant another possible write-up. I was thinking about my job, not about anything else. That's how my brain works. Practical first, always. I checked the system terminal, current vehicle count, 16. Minus the 3 phantom entries, that should be 13. I counted the cameras again. 14 visible. So the actual number was probably 15 or 16 with blind spots. Minus the 3 fake tickets meant the real count was 13 or 14. Close enough that I could work with it if I documented everything. But I needed to be thorough. Dale would want to know what I did to investigate. So I pulled up the gate log. This was a separate system from the ticket printer. It tracked every time the entry or exit gate physically moved. Timestamp, direction, duration. I scrolled to 11:47 p.m. The gate log showed 3 activations. 11:47:12 p.m. Gate up, 4.2 seconds. 11:47:31 p.m. Gate up, 3.8 seconds. 11:48:02 p.m. Gate up, 4.1 seconds. The gate had opened 3 times. While I was sitting right here, I turned and looked at the entry gate through the booth window. It was a standard aluminum arm painted yellow with reflective tape. When it went up, it made a grinding mechanical sound, and the arm swung in an arc that was impossible to miss, even peripherally. I had been sitting in this booth, facing generally forward, drinking coffee. At the time those activations were logged. I didn't see it move. I didn't hear it move. But the gate log said it moved. I felt something then. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling you get when you realize you've been doing a math problem wrong from the very first step and everything after that is garbage. A kind of structural unease. The ticket log said 3 cars entered. The gate log confirmed the gate opened for them. The camera said nothing happened. My own eyes and ears said nothing happened. 2 systems agreed with each other and disagreed with 2 others. I picked up the phone in the booth. I almost called Dale. It was 1:45 in the morning. I put the phone back down. I could hear the conversation in my head. Dale, the system printed 3 tickets for a floor that doesn't exist, and the gate log says it opened, but I didn't see anything and the camera didn't either. He'd tell me to reboot the terminal, check the printer calibration, and stop wasting his time. And he'd be right to say that. That was the reasonable response. So I rebooted the terminal. It took 4 minutes to come back up, the screen cycling through green text I didn't understand, before returning to the main interface. Vehicle count 16. The phantom tickets were still in the system. Rebooting hadn't cleared them. They were logged. Permanent. Part of the record now. I checked the printer. It was a Zebra thermal unit, probably 15 years old. I opened the housing, looked at the ribbon, the thermal head, the feed mechanism. Everything looked normal. I printed a test line. It came out clean. I closed it up. Then I did something I didn't want to do, but knew I had to, for the exception report. I got the flashlight from under the counter, put on my jacket, and went to physically count the vehicles in the garage. Walking through a parking garage at 1 in the morning is not a pleasant experience, But it's not the haunted house scenario people imagine. It's concrete and fluorescent light and oil stains. It smells like exhaust residue and coal dust. Your footsteps echo in a flat, unromantic way. There's nothing cinematic about it. I'd done walkthroughs before, usually when the count was off by more than 2. It took about 20 minutes to do all the levels if you moved at a reasonable pace. I started on level 2. The ramp up from ground level curved to the left, and the fluorescent tubes along the ceiling buzzed in that particular way that sounds almost biological, like a long exhalation. Level 2 had 6 cars. I wrote down the colors and approximate positions on the back of a receipt. Blue sedan, northeast corner. Black SUV, center row. Silver hatchback near the stairwell, and so on. 6. Match the camera. Level 3. 4 cars. All in roughly the positions I'd seen on the monitor. Fine. Level 4, 3 cars. Fine. Level 5. This was where it got quieter. Level 5 was always the least used because it was the highest enclosed level, the farthest walk from the elevators, and the lighting was the worst. 2 of the fluorescent fixtures up there had been dead for weeks, and Dale kept saying he'd put in a maintenance request. I swept the flashlight across the rows. 2 cars, a white pickup truck and a dark green sedan. Both matched my earlier camera count. 15 vehicles total. System said 16. The 16th was the one the woman in scrubs had driven out, and the system just hadn't refreshed properly after the reboot. Or there was one tucked in a blind spot I'd missed. Either way, 15 was defensible. But that wasn't really what I was looking for, and I knew it. I was looking for B3. I stood on level 5 and looked at the ramp that led up to the roof. The sign on the wall read R, roof level, with an arrow pointing up. Below it, the sign read L5 in block letters. I looked at the other walls. Every level had its designation painted in large white characters on the concrete near the stairwell and at the top of each ramp. L5, L4 below that, L3, L2, G. I'd seen them 1,000 times. There was no B anything. There was no downward ramp from ground level. The ground level was the bottom. I took the stairs down instead of the ramp. The stairwell was the narrowest part of the structure. Poured concrete walls, metal handrails, the kind of echoey sterile space that made your breathing sound louder than it should. Each landing had a door with the level number stenciled on it. L5, L4, L3, L2, G. I reached the ground level door and pushed it open. I was back in the lobby area near my booth. I stood there for a moment looking at the ground floor. The concrete slab. The painted lines of the entry and exit lanes. The booth, its glass reflecting the overhead lights. Beyond the booth, the street. Below me, nothing. Solid ground. The building plans, I knew, which were posted in a frame on the wall near the elevator for fire safety purposes, showed 6 levels. G, L2, L3, L4, L5, R. That was it. I'd looked at that diagram hundreds of times while waiting for cars. I walked over and looked at it again. The diagram was a simplified cross-section of the garage, showing the ramp system connecting each level. At the bottom was the ground level, shaded gray. Below it, nothing. Just the edge of the paper. But here's what I noticed for the first time, and I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I know how it sounds. The bottom edge of the diagram had been trimmed, not torn, cut, with a straight edge. The lamination of the posted plan continued right up to the cut, smooth and sealed, as though the document had always been this size. but the cut went through the bottom margin in a way that didn't match the other 3 sides. The top and sides had a consistent half-inch white border. The bottom had almost none, as if something had been below that ground level line, and someone had removed it cleanly enough that you'd never notice unless you were looking. I stood there staring at a building diagram at 1:30 in the morning, thinking about margins. That's the kind of night it was. I went back to the booth. I sat down. I pulled the ticket log ribbon toward me again and looked at the 3 entries. 4401, 4402, 4403. B3, B3, B3. I looked at the gate log timestamps. I looked at the camera footage, which I rewound and watched again just to be absolutely sure. Empty lane, no movement, no headlights. The gate never moved on camera. 2 records said one thing, and 2 others said the opposite. The building plan might have been altered, and I was sitting in a small glass box trying to figure out which version of reality to put on the exception form. I decided to check something else. The ticket dispenser at the entry lane kept a small internal counter. Every time it issued a ticket, the counter incremented by 1. Dale had shown me how to read it once during training as part of a procedure I'd never had to use. You open the front panel of the dispenser with a key, and there was a small mechanical counter behind the ticket stack, like an odometer. If 3 tickets had really been dispensed, the counter would reflect it. I grabbed the dispenser key from the hook in the booth and walked out to the entry lane. The dispenser was a metal box on a post, arcs dented and scratched from years of people pulling up too close. I unlocked the front panel and swung it open. The counter was there, a little row of white digits on black wheels. The last number on the reconciliation sheet from the previous night was 4,398. The morning shift had logged tickets through 4,400 during the day. The counter should have read 4,400 if no tickets were issued during my shift, or 4,401 if the woman in scrubs had gotten one on entry, which she had. I could see her ticket on the exit log. The counter read 4,404. 4 tickets issued since the morning count. 1 for the woman. 3 for B3. The dispenser had physically issued the tickets. The paper had moved through the mechanism. The counter had turned, but no car had pulled up to take them. I looked at the slot where the tickets came out. There were no unclaimed tickets sitting there. The slot was empty. Whoever, whatever, had triggered the dispenser had also taken the tickets. I closed the panel, locked it, and walked back to the booth. I sat down and poured more coffee from my thermos. It was lukewarm. I drank it anyway, because I needed something normal to do with my hands. Let me tell you what I was thinking, because I know the question is, why didn't I leave? I was thinking about $16.50 an hour. I was thinking about the written warning in my file. I was thinking about the conversation with my ex-wife, where she'd said I couldn't hold a job, and how that had settled into my bones in a way I couldn't shake, even though I knew she'd said it just to hurt me. I was thinking about how, if I left mid-shift and told Dale the system was haunted, I'd be out of a job by the end of the week. I was thinking about the fact that nothing had actually happened to me. No one had threatened me. Nothing had moved in the dark. I was a guy in a booth with a paperwork problem. That's all. So I kept working. At 2:15, I decided to check the camera recordings from earlier in the day to see if there was any precedent, any other B3 entries in the previous 24 hours. The camera system stored 72 hours of footage on a loop. I couldn't search the ticket log history from the booth terminal. It only showed the current day's print. But the camera system had a basic search function that let me jump to specific timestamps. I didn't find any B3 entries on camera, obviously, because I couldn't search the ticket log from the camera interface, or what I did instead was pull the previous night's reconciliation sheet from the file drawer in the booth. Every night's sheet was kept for 30 days. I found last night's sheet, filled out by the guy who worked Tuesdays, a kid named Marcus who was in community college. His vehicle count matched his system count. No discrepancies, no exception notes, no mention of B3. I checked the night before that. Same, clean reconciliation, then the one before that. Clean. I went back a full week. All clean. Whatever this was, it hadn't happened before. Or if it had, it hadn't shown up in the logs. Then I found something. 9 days back. A Wednesday like tonight. The reconciliation sheet was filled out in Dale's handwriting. He sometimes covered shifts. The vehicle count matched the system count. No exceptions noted. But at the bottom of the sheet, in the margin, Dale had written something in small, tight print. I tilted the paper toward the booth light to read it. Printer hiccup, 3 tickets, no match. Cleared from system. Do not report. No mention of B3, no mention of a floor code, no detail at all beyond those 10 words. But 3 tickets with no match. Cleared from the system, and the instruction not to report it. Dale had seen this before. Dale had handled it by deleting the records. I put the sheet back in the file and sat very still for a moment. My coffee was cold. The space heater was clicking. On the monitor, the 4 camera feeds showed the same still images of parked cars and empty concrete they'd been showing all night. Nothing moved. Nothing flickered. The garage was exactly as quiet and unremarkable as it had always been. But Dale had seen this, and his response was to erase it. That scared me more than the logs. Because Dale was the most bureaucratic, by-the-book, cover-your-own-ass manager I'd ever worked for. The man documented everything. He'd written me up for a motorcycle I couldn't see. The idea of Dale deliberately deleting records and writing "do not report" in the margin of an official reconciliation sheet meant that whatever this was, he'd decided it was less dangerous to hide it than to explain it. I started going through the older sheets more carefully. I went back the full 30 days. I found one more note, 3 weeks prior, again on a Wednesday. Different handwriting this time. I didn't recognize it, maybe a shift worker who'd quit or been replaced before I started. This one just said, 3 extra tickets, system error, and nothing else. But the vehicle count on that sheet was adjusted. The system count had been manually overwritten. Someone had whited out the printed number and written a lower one by hand, so the reconciliation would balance. 3 tickets. Always 3. Always unexplained. Appearing on Wednesdays. I looked at the clock on the booth wall. It was 2:41 a.m. Wednesday night, or Thursday morning technically. My shift ended at 6. I had 3 hours and 19 minutes left. I want to describe what the garage sounded like right then because I think it matters. There was the space heater clicking as its element cycled on and off. There was the fluorescent tube directly above the booth, which had a faint, high-pitched whine that I usually stopped noticing after an hour, but was suddenly very aware of. There was the occasional tick of the booth's metal frame expanding or contracting with temperature. And under all of that, the deep, broad silence of a concrete structure with no living movement inside it. A parking garage at night has a specific kind of quiet. It's not the quiet of an empty room. It's the quiet of a large, hollow, multi-level space where sound carries in strange ways. You can hear a drip from 3 floors up. You can hear the hum of the exit sign on level 4 from the ground floor stairwell. It's a silence that has architecture. I sat in that silence and made a decision. I was going to complete my reconciliation the way Dale wanted it done, which apparently meant fudging the numbers, clearing the phantom tickets, and pretending none of this had happened. I'd adjust the system count, balance the sheet, and go home. And whatever was going on with the B3 entries was above my pay grade, and if Dale knew about it and had decided to bury it, then it was his problem, not mine. I turned to the terminal to delete the 3 tickets from the active log. The system had a function for this. You could void a ticket by entering its number and a supervisor code. Dale had given me the code during training for situations where a ticket jammed or double printed. I typed in 4401 and the supervisor code. The screen flashed. Void ticket 4401, floor B3, confirm Y/N. I pressed Y. The screen went blank for a second, then returned to the main interface. Ticket 4401 was gone from the active log. Vehicle count updated to 15. Good. I typed in 4402. Void ticket 4402. Floor B3, confirm Y/N. I pressed Y. The screen blanked and returned. Vehicle count 14. And the process was working. One more. I typed in 4403. The screen displayed void ticket 4403. Floor B3, confirm Y/N. I pressed Y. The screen blanked. It stayed blank longer this time. 2 seconds, 3, 4. Then it returned, but not to the main interface. It returned to a screen I'd never seen before. Dark green background instead of black. A single line of text at the top. B3, active vehicles. 3. Below it, 3 lines. Space B, 3-01, occupied, entry 11:47 p.m. Space B, 3-02. Occupied, entry 11:47 p.m. Space B, 3-03. Occupied, entry 11:48 p.m. And below that, level status. Occupied gate. Access. Restricted reconciliation required before shift end. I had never seen this screen. This was not part of the DOS program I'd been trained on. The interface was different. Same green text style, but the layout was cleaner and more structured, as if it were a separate module running underneath the one I normally used. And it was telling me that level B3 had 3 occupied parking spaces and that I was required to reconcile them before my shift ended. I pressed escape. The screen didn't change. I pressed it again. Nothing. I tried Control-C, Control-Z, every exit command I could think of from my limited knowledge of old computer systems. The screen stayed. The cursor blinked after the last line, steady and patient, waiting for input. I pressed Enter just to see what would happen. A new line appeared. Reconciliation options. 1. Print. B. 3. Report 2. Verify vehicles in person 3. Contact level supervisor 4. Defer to next shift. I stared at option 3. Contact level supervisor. B3 had a supervisor. This wasn't a glitch. This was an administered level in the system, with its own oversight, its own reconciliation requirements, its own vehicle tracking. Someone had built this into the software, Someone maintained it. I pressed 4. Defer to next shift. That seemed like the safest option. Let someone else deal with it. The screen updated. Defer denied. Wednesday reconciliation must be completed by shift operator on duty. Select option 1, 2, or 3. Wednesday? It knew it was Wednesday, and Wednesdays were apparently when B3 had to be reconciled, which explained why the phantom tickets only appeared on Wednesdays, which explained why Dale had seen them on a Wednesday, which explained why the other note was also from a Wednesday. Every Wednesday night, 3 cars entered a level that didn't exist, and whoever was working had to deal with it. I pressed 1, or print B3 report. The printer under the counter hummed to life. The thermal paper began feeding out, line by line. I tore it off when it finished and held it up. It was a standard parking report, the kind the system generated for each level during reconciliation. But the header read, Level B3, Nightly Reconciliation Report, and it listed 3 vehicles. Not by license plate. The system didn't track plates, but by ticket number, entry time, and space assignment. At the bottom, there was a line I'd never seen on any other level report. Vehicle description, required for B3 reconciliation. B3-01, blank. B3-02, blank B3-03, blank. It wanted me to fill in what the cars looked like, which meant someone was expected to go down to B3, look at the cars, and describe them. In person, and when I put the report down on the counter, I looked at the clock. 3:07 a.m. I looked at the camera monitor. The 4 feeds showed the same static images. None of them showed a level B3. I'm going to tell you what I did next, and I want you to understand that I did it because I was tired, because I needed this job, because the system was telling me I couldn't defer, and because some part of my brain, the practical, problem-solving part that had gotten me through the divorce and the apartment and the overnight shifts, decided that the fastest way through this was to just do what the system asked and go home. I wasn't brave. I wasn't curious. I was a man who wanted to complete a form so he could leave at 6 in the morning. I picked up the flashlight, the printed report, and a pen. I left the booth. The ground level of the garage was unchanged. Entry lane, exit lane, my booth, the elevators, the stairwell door. I walked to the stairwell and opened it. The concrete steps led up to L2. To the right, the wall. No downward staircase, no door. Just the flat, painted surface of the stairwell's ground level terminus. But I looked at the wall more carefully this time. The paint was the same institutional gray as the rest of the stairwell, but the wall to the right, the one that should have been the exterior foundation, had a seam, a vertical line, floor to ceiling about 3 feet from the corner, and another one about 3 feet from the first. They were hairline cracks in the paint, almost invisible unless you were standing close with a flashlight. A door-width section of wall, outlined by 2 barely visible seams. I want to say I hesitated, but I didn't. I was on autopilot. I pushed on the section between the seams. Nothing happened. I pushed harder. Nothing. I tried sliding it to the left. It moved. Not easily. The concrete, or whatever it was made of, was heavy and ground against the floor, but it moved. It slid about 2 feet to the left and revealed a landing. A concrete landing identical to the others in the stairwell, with a metal handrail and a flight of steps leading down. The landing had a stenciled label on the wall, B3 down. The stairs went down about 1 flight. The same poured concrete construction, the same metal railing, the same kind of fluorescent fixture on the ceiling, though the ones here were off. My flashlight was the only light. The air coming up from below was different from the rest of the garage. Not colder exactly, but denser. It smelled less like oil and exhaust and more like wet mineral, like groundwater against stone. I went down. The stairs ended at another landing, and the landing opened onto a parking level. I swept the flashlight across it. It was the same layout as the levels above. Rows of painted spaces, yellow curb markers, concrete columns at regular intervals. The ceiling was lower than the other levels, maybe 7.5 feet instead of 9, which gave everything a compressed feeling. The floor was slightly damp, not puddled, but the concrete had a sheen to it, as if moisture was seeping up from below. The fluorescent fixtures were all dark except one, far at the back, which flickered in a slow, arrhythmic pattern. There were 3 cars. They were parked in the first 3 spaces, the ones nearest the stairwell entrance, RD space B3-01, B3-02, B3-03. The spaces were labeled on the concrete in the same white paint as the rest of the garage. The cars were ordinary. A dark red sedan, an older model, maybe a Buick, a silver minivan, and a tan station wagon with a faded bumper sticker I couldn't read from where I stood. 3 cars on a level that didn't appear on the building plan, behind a hidden door in the stairwell, beneath a garage that was supposedly built on a solid slab. I was standing in a basement that shouldn't exist, looking at 3 vehicles that had entered through a gate that didn't move, and the system wanted me to write down what they looked like. So I did. On the report, I wrote, B3-01, dark red sedan, 4-door. B3-02, silver minivan. B3-03, tan station wagon, bumper sticker rear. My hand was steady. I want you to know that. My hand was steady because I wasn't letting myself think about what this meant. I was filling out a form, that's all. I was completing a task so I could go back to the booth and finish my shift. But I noticed something as I wrote. The cars had no license plates. Not removed. There were no plate brackets, no screw holes, no mounting points. The rear of each vehicle was smooth where the plate should have been, as if the cars had been manufactured without any accommodation for registration. I walked closer to the red sedan and looked through the driver's side window. The interior was clean. Gray cloth seats, standard dashboard, steering wheel. No personal items. No registration sticker on the windshield. No parking ticket on the dashboard. The odometer, I could just see it in the flashlight beam, read 0,00000, 0 miles. Yet all 3 cars were the same. Clean interiors, no plates, no registration, 0 miles. They looked like cars that had never been driven. Cars that had come into existence in these parking spaces, fully formed, with no history. I stepped back. The single flickering fluorescent at the far end of the level cast a weak, stuttering light that made the shadows between the columns pulse. The rest of the level stretched back into darkness. I couldn't tell how far it went. The levels above were the same dimensions as the building's footprint. I knew that from the diagram, but this level, from where I stood, seemed to extend further back than the building above could possibly allow. The flashlight beam didn't reach the far wall. It just faded into dark concrete and more painted lines and more empty spaces, receding into a depth that felt wrong, and I didn't go further in. I turned around, walked up the stairs, slid the wall panel back into place, and returned to the booth. It was 3:38 a.m. I sat down and looked at the terminal. The B3 screen was still up. A new line had appeared at the bottom. B3 vehicle descriptions received. Reconciliation complete. Return to main interface. Y/N, I pressed Y. The screen went black, then returned to the normal DOS interface. Vehicle count, 13. The 3 B3 vehicles were no longer included in the general count. The system had separated them out. My reconciliation would balance. The cash drawer was correct. The vehicle count matched the cameras. Everything was clean. I filled out the nightly reconciliation sheet. 13 vehicles, system confirmed, cash balanced, no discrepancies, no exceptions. I did not mention B3. And I didn't mention the phantom tickets. I didn't mention the hidden stairwell or the 3 cars with no license plates and no mileage. I understood then what Dale had done on his Wednesday and the person before him. You go down, you fill in the blanks, the system accepts it, and the numbers balance. That's the deal. That's the arrangement. You don't ask what B3 is. You don't ask how 3 cars appear in a basement that shouldn't exist beneath a building built on a concrete slab. You don't ask why it happens on Wednesdays. You complete the form and you go home. The rest of the shift was quiet. No more cars exited, no more tickets printed. The cameras showed the same still images. I sat in the booth and listened to the space heater click and the fluorescent tube whine and the huge hollow silence of the garage above and around and I now knew below me. At 5:45, I started my end-of-shift procedures. Cash drawer count, final log printout, system check. Everything balanced. The printed log for the night showed 1 exit at the woman in scrubs and no other activity. Tickets 4401, 4402, and 4403 were gone from the record. The system had erased them completely. Even the gate log, when I checked, no longer showed the 3 activations at 11:47 and 11:48. The records had been cleaned, not by me. By the system itself, after I completed the B3 reconciliation. Whatever this process was, it was self-maintaining. It created the records, demanded they be addressed, and then erased the evidence once the task was done. The only trace left was whatever the shift operator chose to write down, or not write down, on the physical reconciliation sheet. I understood Dale's margin note now. Do not report. Not because he was lazy, because there was nothing to report. The system made sure of that. At 6 a.m, Marcus came in for the day shift. He was wearing earbuds and carrying a fast food bag. He gave me the usual nod. I gave him the reconciliation sheet. He glanced at it, saw it balanced, and tossed it in the file drawer. He didn't ask me anything. He never did. I walked out through the exit lane into the gray December morning. The cold air hit my face, and I stood on the sidewalk for a second, breathing. The parking garage behind me was a building. Concrete and rebar and paint. 6 levels. G, L2, L3, L4, L5, R. That's what the sign said, and that's what the diagram showed. That's what the city permit on file would confirm if anyone ever checked. But as I got into my car, which was parked on the street because employees weren't allowed to use the garage, I looked at the base of the structure. The foundation wall, street level. Below it, sidewalk. Below that, dirt, rock, utilities, whatever, was under a downtown Dayton street. The foundation wall had a seam, a vertical hairline crack in the concrete, barely visible, running from the sidewalk level down into the ground. and another one about 3 feet from the first. I drove home. I slept. I went back for my shift Thursday night. The logs were clean. No B3 entries. The terminal showed the normal DOS interface. The gate log matched the cameras. Everything agreed. It wasn't Wednesday. I worked there for another 6 weeks after that. 2 more Wednesdays came and went. Both times, the 3 tickets appeared around the same time. Both times, I went through the process. Down the hidden stairs, flashlight, 3 cars, descriptions, back up, reconciliation complete, records erased. The cars were always different. Different makes, different colors, always 3, always with no plates, no mileage, no personal items. Always parked in B3-01, B3-02, B3-03. The rest of the level always dark, always extending back further than it should, always empty except for those 3 spaces. I never went past the 3rd space. I never explored the depth of the level. I never tried to open any of the car doors. I never took photographs. I completed the form, and I went home. That was the arrangement. I quit in February, not because of B3, because I got a better paying job at a warehouse. Standard hours, no overnight shifts, no reconciliation reports. When I turned in my resignation, Dale processed it without comment. He didn't ask me about Wednesdays. He didn't say anything unusual. He just shook my hand and said he hoped the new job worked out. But as I was leaving his office, he had a small office on the 2nd floor of the attached building. I noticed a binder on his shelf, labeled Level Maintenance, Restricted. It was thick, much thicker than anything a 6-level parking garage should require. I didn't open it. I didn't ask about it. 2 weeks after I left, I was unpacking a box in my new apartment and found my old work jacket, the one I'd worn in the booth. I checked the pockets before putting it away. In the left inside pocket, there was a folded piece of thermal paper. I didn't remember putting it there. I unfolded it. It was a parking receipt. The kind that printed when a car exited the garage. Used the timestamp read February 14th at 3:12 a.m., 2 days after my last shift. The exit gate was listed as E1, the main exit. The ticket number was 4892. The entry time was listed as 11:47 p.m. the previous evening. The floor code was B3. The payment amount was $0. At the bottom of the receipt, where it normally printed, "Thank you, Cornerstone Parking," it said something different. Reconciliation accepted. Vehicle released. One of the 3 had left. Through the exit gate, into the city. A car with no plates and no history and no miles on the odometer, released into the world on a cold Wednesday night after someone, maybe Dale, maybe whoever was covering my old shift, filled out the form and completed the process. I don't know what B3 is. I don't know what the cars are. I don't know where that level exists in any physical sense that makes contact with the geology beneath that building. I don't know why it's Wednesdays or why it's 3 or why the system demands a human witness before it resolves. I don't know any of that. What I know is that every Wednesday night somewhere in Dayton, Ohio, a parking garage attendant walks down a flight of stairs that shouldn't be there, looks at 3 cars that have never been driven, writes down what they look like, and walks back up. And sometimes, after the form is completed, one of those cars leaves. I drive past the garage occasionally on my way to other places. It looks the same as it always did. Concrete and fluorescent light and yellow painted curbs. 6 levels. Nothing unusual. But I check the foundation wall every time. And every time, the seams are still there.